In the vast expanse of the South China Sea, one of the most contested waters on Earth, an unexpected collision has captured the world's attention. It wasn't between enemies. It wasn't between rivals. It was between two ships, flying the same flag, the flag of China. The event took place near a tiny speck in the ocean, known as Scarborough Shoal, a shallow reef that's been at the center of a bitter territorial dispute between China and the Philippines for more than a decade. It's a place where the line between peace and provocation grows thinner every day. But no one imagined that China's own ships, a Coast Guard cutter and a People's Liberation Army Navy destroyer, would collide with each other during a live standoff. The footage that emerged afterward stunned even the most experienced observers. This is the full story: how a single mistake exposed the chaos inside China's maritime forces, and why this moment could change the balance of power in the South China Sea. It all began early in the morning, under a humid gray sky. According to reports, the China Coast Guard vessel number 3104 was shadowing a Philippine Coast Guard ship conducting a routine resupply mission. The Philippine vessel was heading toward a small outpost on the disputed reef, carrying food, water, and construction materials for its soldiers stationed there. For years, such missions have been dangerous. The moment a Philippine ship enters the area, multiple Chinese vessels appear, shadowing it, blocking its path, flashing lasers, and firing water cannons to intimidate the crew. But on this day, something different happened. China had deployed not just Coast Guard ships, but also a Navy destroyer named Guilin, armed with anti-ship missiles and radar systems. The presence of both the Coast Guard and the Navy suggested one thing: China wanted to make a statement. As the Philippine ship approached the reef, Chinese radio messages echoed through the channels. "You are entering Chinese territorial waters. Leave immediately." The Philippine captain responded calmly. "We are operating within our exclusive economic zone." The exchange was tense but familiar. What came next, however, was not. Video released later showed the Coast Guard ship accelerating to block the Philippine vessel. Waves crashed against the hull as it moved dangerously close, just a few meters away. Then came the burst of white spray, a high-pressure water cannon, aimed directly at the Philippine bridge. The crew could barely see. The deck was drenched, but amid the chaos, something else happened, something even the Chinese officers did not expect. The Coast Guard ship, in its aggressive maneuver, suddenly turned left. At that exact moment, the massive Chinese Navy destroyer Guilin was moving on a parallel course. In the fog, with poor visibility and chaotic communication, the two ships crossed paths. 1 second of misjudgment, and it happened. A deep metallic crash echoed through the waves. Steel against steel. Two Chinese ships, allies, collided in their own operation. Cameras from the Philippine side captured the impact. The smaller Coast Guard cutter shook violently, its hull scraping across the destroyer's side. Sparks flew. Smoke began to rise from the cutter's midsection. The Chinese sailors could be seen running across the deck, shouting commands. For several seconds, no one knew what had happened. Then the Coast Guard vessel began to list slightly to one side, water entering from a damaged section near its stern. The collision had caused a breach. News of the incident spread rapidly across defense networks. At first, China remained silent. State media did not report anything. On Chinese social platforms, videos were deleted within minutes. But the footage was already out, filmed by the Philippine Coast Guard, and later shared with international media. In the clip, analysts could clearly identify both Chinese vessels by their hull numbers. Within hours, The Guardian, Newsweek, and Naval News confirmed the story. They reported that this was the first known collision between a Chinese Coast Guard ship and a Chinese Navy vessel in modern history. The irony was undeniable. In an attempt to intimidate a smaller nation, China's own forces had collided with each other. As the details emerged, experts began piecing together what went wrong. According to maritime analysts, coordination between the China Coast Guard and the People's Liberation Army Navy plan has always been fragile. Though both operate under Beijing's command, their communication systems, protocols, and training are vastly different. The Coast Guard, while technically a law enforcement agency, now answers to the Central Military Commission, the same body that controls the Chinese Navy. But in the heat of a real-world confrontation, those command lines often blur. In simple terms, the Coast Guard acts like police, the Navy acts like soldiers, and in this case, both acted without coordination. Satellite imagery later showed the Coast Guard ship being towed away by another Chinese vessel. Its deck appeared charred, its antennas bent. The destroyer, though less damaged, had black streaks running down its hull. Beijing officially described the incident as a minor accident. But to the world, it was much more than that. Because this single collision revealed something deeper, a glimpse into the growing confusion inside China's maritime power structure. For years, China has tried to project control over the South China Sea, building artificial islands, installing radar systems, and sending hundreds of ships into disputed waters. But that dominance depends on one thing: discipline. And the collision showed the world that even China's own units could lose control when pushed too far. In Manila, the Philippines government quickly responded. They called the incident dangerous, reckless, and unprofessional. The Foreign Ministry released a statement saying, "China's actions are endangering lives and stability in the region." Within days, the United States Navy stepped in. The USS Dewey, a guided missile destroyer, began patrols near Scarborough Shoal. The U.S. 7th Fleet released a calm but clear message: "We will continue to operate wherever international law allows. Freedom of navigation will be maintained." It wasn't just a message to Beijing, it was a signal to the entire region that the U.S. was watching. Meanwhile, inside China, the government tried to downplay the story. State outlets called it a technical mishap. But behind closed doors, military leaders were reportedly furious. According to sources cited by Naval News, internal reviews were ordered immediately. The officers commanding both ships were questioned about their decision-making. Experts believe the collision embarrassed Beijing at a critical time, just as it was trying to portray itself as a responsible global naval power. At sea, such collisions are rare, especially between ships from the same country. In modern naval operations, even a few meters of miscalculation can cause disaster. The fact that two advanced Chinese vessels collided in calm weather raised serious doubts about China's command discipline. Retired U.S. Navy officers commented that it shows a lack of professionalism and coordination. Others suggested that China's increasingly aggressive maritime behavior was making such accidents inevitable. As one analyst from the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative put it, "When you push your ships to act aggressively every day, eventually, they make a mistake." The global reaction was swift. In Tokyo, Japan's defense ministry said it was monitoring the situation closely. Vietnam called for restraint, and in Washington, officials said the incident highlighted the risk of miscalculation in the South China Sea. But perhaps the strongest response came from the Philippines itself. In a televised address, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said, "We will not be intimidated. The South China Sea is not anyone's private sea." Crowds gathered in Manila, waving flags and calling for stronger action. For many Filipinos, the footage of the two Chinese ships colliding was symbolic. A moment when China's own aggression turned against itself. Back on the waters, recovery operations continued for several days. The Coast Guard ship was eventually taken back to Hainan Island for repairs. Chinese divers examined the hull damage, while satellite photos showed oil slicks near the site of the crash. Officially, China said no crew members were seriously injured. Unofficially, there were reports of several sailors being hospitalized for minor burns and fractures. Inside the military community, the incident became a lesson and a warning. A single second of miscommunication can undo years of planning. Analysts now say this may mark a turning point in China's South China Sea strategy. Until now, Beijing has relied on constant pressure, sending Coast Guard ships to harass other nations' vessels, while its navy provides backup from behind. But after this collision, that strategy may have to change. Because if China's own forces can't operate safely together, it undermines the image of control that Beijing wants the world to see. In Washington, defense experts analyzed the incident closely. Some argued it proved that China's gray zone tactics, using Coast Guard and militia ships to intimidate others, were becoming too dangerous. Others saw it as an opportunity for diplomacy. If China appeared careless or divided, it could push neighboring countries closer to the U.S. And that's exactly what started to happen. Just weeks after the collision, the Philippines and the United States conducted joint naval drills near Palawan Island, the closest point to the disputed waters. The drills included live fire exercises and simulated escort missions, clearly aimed at showing unity against Chinese pressure. But even as tensions rose, Chinese media continued to maintain silence. No images of the damaged ships were released. No interviews with the crew. Only short statements, insisting that China remains committed to maritime safety. It was a message meant for domestic audiences, to reassure the public that everything was under control. But to the outside world, the silence spoke louder than words. The South China Sea has always been a stage for power, pride, and politics. But this time, China's biggest rival wasn't another country, it was its own reflection. Two of its ships, built to project strength, instead revealed weakness. Two crews, trained to dominate, instead collided. And while no missiles were fired and no lives were lost, the impact of that crash rippled far beyond the waves. In Manila, diplomats now talk about the Guilin incident as a turning point, proof that Chinese operations are not as flawless as they appear. In Washington, military planners see it as a warning that miscommunication in crowded seas could easily trigger something bigger. And in Beijing, officials are likely rethinking how far they can push before another accident, or something worse, occurs. Because every confrontation in these waters carries a risk. And in the South China Sea, where pride runs deeper than the ocean, one mistake can start a storm. For now, the waves around Scarborough Shoal have gone quiet again. But the world knows that silence in these waters never lasts for long. Beneath the calm, tensions simmer. Every radar ping, every engine hum, every ship on the horizon could be the start of another incident. The collision between the two Chinese ships was more than just a physical crash. It was a symbolic one. A collision of pride, policy, and power. A reminder that even the mightiest fleets can falter when aggression replaces discipline. And so, the question remains. If China cannot control its own ships in its own waters, how can it ever control the sea it claims as its own?